Trench Crusade, the Grimdark skirmish wargame taking the world by storm. With some fantastic lore, artwork and highly detailed miniatures, it's no surprise that Trench Crusade crossed paths with the Grimdark Compendium, with each of the 6 Compendium artists being tasked with tackling a specific faction. The Heretic Legion fell into my eager hands. The Heretic Legion course comprises 4 full-length tutorial videos covering different miniatures from the faction, from the humble troops to the brutal Anointed heavy infantry, the spectral murderous death commando, and the terrifying warwolf. In today's video, I'll give you an overview of how I approach this monumental course, touching upon my overall vision for the Legion, some of the more advanced techniques I employed to create hyper-realistic and visceral effects, my thoughts on creating a realistic, atmospheric and grimdark basing scheme, and much more. I'm Black Chalice Studio, and you are watching the Grimdark Compendium. The main military force of Satan on Earth is the Heretic Legions, raised from amongst the citizens of the damned. Though the vast bulk of the Heretic Legions are made of mortal humans, hell often sends their own abhorrent progeny to reinforce their mortal foot soldiers. Nightmarish war beasts made of captured and possessed creatures, and dreaded artillery witches who act as mobile artillery supporting lightning assaults. Thus, in the accursed theatre of war, mortals and abominations march hand in withering hand, bound by the suffering ties of damnation. Being handed the Heretic Legion with which to make such a large series immediately gave me so many ideas on how to portray these satanic warriors. First and foremost, I knew I wanted to be as faithful as possible to the amazing artwork of Mike Francina. This was also the perfect opportunity to refine and expand upon some of my current go-to grimdark methods, along with a chance to try some new and exciting techniques that I'd previously seen but never attempted. I had an absolute blast getting really creative with each episode, starting with episode 1, the Heretic Troops. I focused mainly on an effective yet fairly simple paint scheme that lends itself really well to painting multiple miniatures in batches. For episode 2, the Anointed heavy infantry, I spent a lot of time searching for an authentic way of representing their armour, charred, pitted and blackened by the fires of hell, settling on a technique that was new to me and has now fast become a staple amongst my pre-weathering steps. It's also in this episode that I talk in depth about my basing scheme, showing how to handcraft a realistic, dystopian and grimdark trench warfare base, using a variety of different materials ranging from cork sheet to different types of balsa wood and brass etched elements. I expand upon how taking some time and effort to create a base like this can elevate a miniature above and beyond a more simple offering. Episode 3 gives me the opportunity to go wild with my favourite sculpt from Trench Crusade, the Death Commando. From the moment I saw the sculpt and read the lore, I couldn't wait to bring about my rendition of this murderous, terrifying and brutal assassin. This is where we'll look at combining different types of media to create some really profound and unique effects, like varied, visually striking and effective verdigris for bronze armour and super realistic rust. Mixing oils and pigments with Villainy ink gives some super nice results. It just goes to show that being experimental and trying new things can not only bring about interesting finishes, but also help to expand your horizons when it comes to creativity and achieving your vision. Episode 4 will focus on the monstrous, unstoppable warwolf. This guy is a veritable canvas for throwing all of your methods and techniques at, a huge, intimidating and awe-inspiring beast. It's here that I'll walk you through a technique I'd seen demonstrated by the mighty Dark Ages workshop and Echoes of Vermin, the application of real fur to add character, detail and terrifying realism. Throughout the series, one of my favourite ways of bringing an extra layer of texture, detail and character, and also to have some fun, is to add real materials to the sculpts. A prime example of this is covering the skirt of the Anointed with real cloth. Let's take a closer look at how I achieved this and the finish you can get with some relatively simple steps. To begin with, we're going to need an adhesive mix, some medium grade cheesecloth, an old brush and some sharp scissors. Our adhesive is a roughly equal mix of water and PVA glue, to which I'll add a touch of texture paste, not only to help it stick, but to add some more visual interest and diversity. We'll blend this together until we have a fairly thin, even consistency. Next up, we're going to grab a piece of cheesecloth and cut it to the rough shape of the area we're trying to cover. You don't need to be overly precise here, as it will be refined shortly. Just cut it so it's a little taller and wider than the skirt to account for manipulation and mimicking the folds in the resin underneath. After submerging the cloth into the adhesive mix, I'll push it onto a cork placemat and press out the excess using an old brush. Once we've done that, using a pair of tweezers, we can lay it in place on the miniature, gauge how much needs to be trimmed away, and then do so. This is where we now refine and manipulate the cloth into place. Using an old brush, I begin to slowly and gently push the cloth into the folds of the skirt and up to his belt. We want to match the underlying volumes and shapes as best we can. If at first the cloth is sliding about too much and you're struggling to get it in place properly, give it 10 minutes to dry and it will behave a little bit better. Just go back and forth until you're happy with how it looks. After a few hours it will dry completely solid and well stuck, ready for further weathering, texture and paint. I have a blast adding details like this to my miniatures. It also gives them quite a bit of extra character. Whilst preparing for this project, I did a lot of research into trench warfare, the environment, the huge mental strain it placed on the combatants, the way that incessant, muddy, wet conditions affected machinery, materials, and man-made structures. Trench warfare was the epitome of horrific, brutal attrition, wearing down everyone and everything involved. And to convey some of this into the Heretic Legion, I made extensive use of various texture mediums, such as mud, grit, and corrosion, to help push the aesthetic of prolonged decay and permanent filth. Whilst I was planning and researching the use of textures, I also read heavily into the superb lore of the Heretic Legion. Being born from hell itself, I wanted to reinforce this by looking at alternative ways of rendering their metals as pitted, scorched and tarnished. After all, being embraced by the fires of hell wouldn't leave them with pristine, clean armour. I settled on a technique I'd seen used heavily in military modelling, an alternative way of adding a layer of surface manipulation and texture above and beyond the usual texture pastes. Let's take a look at this technique in a bit more detail. We're going to need a few basic materials, some Tamiya basic type putty, thin plastic cement and an old brush that you don't mind sacrificing to the dark gods. This technique isn't kind on your brushes. Just be aware that the combination of putty and cement creates quite the smell, so make sure you have adequate ventilation and a mask on hand if required. By adding some of the plastic cement to the Tamiya putty, we can dilute it into a slightly thinner mix. With the putty diluted, we can begin applying it to the armour. One section at a time is ideal. This mix will dry quite quickly, but we have a little time to work with it. By stippling it on thinly, we get a nice, subtle, pitted texture, and by laying it on a bit more heavily and dabbing at the lumps, we get a really nice blistered, chunky look. Different dilution levels give different effects when applied, so just have some fun playing around with what you can achieve. This mix dries rock solid and can be applied over multiple layers to bring about some brilliant finishes. The variety of textures we can create here are accentuated so well when we use Villainy ink over top of them during the painting process. All of the small divots and pits retaining our unifying washes and weathering effects. This technique can be applied to a multitude of different surfaces for different looks, from metals to stone, wood and even flesh. One last thing I'd like to show you today is something I mentioned earlier, a great way to save time, become more efficient and keep colour schemes consistent: batch painting. For the Heretic troop squad, I painted them all at the same time. Basic base coat via the airbrush, some brushwork for other details, a unifying wash, and then effects. Our base coats for the majority of the miniature, the fatigues and cape, is a simple 3-step grey fade. After priming the troops in black, I applied a few thin coats of GW Deathcore Drab as our initial base coat through the airbrush. This was followed by a few zenithal layers of GW Storm Vermin Fur, concentrating more on the upper areas that light would naturally gather. And for our final spot highlight, we come in with Ammo Atom Blue Grey. Here you can see that I applied the other base coats quickly and simply by brush. After around 90 minutes, the acrylics have cured and we can come in for our unifying wash on the troops. For this, I used Decrepit Filth from Villainy Ink Phase 2, applied by brush, thinned slightly with spirits, just to make it flow a little bit better. I applied this fairly liberally to the entirety of the miniatures and wicked up any excess with a damp brush. Decrepit Filth is also the unifying wash for our bases, so there's a little more time saved. By the time I'd applied the unifying wash to the rest of the squad, the first one was ready for the Reductive pass, the wash having had around 15 minutes to dry, with an initial blast of a blow dryer on medium heat to flash the wash off so it looked touch dry. When it came to the weathering steps like the rust application, the same approach was taken. I applied Sector Rust and Ex Machina by brush to the metallics, working my way through the squad one by one. By the time I'd finished with the last one, the first one was ready to be refined and the Reductive pass performed. This meant that my colours, placement, drying times and results were all consistent across the entire squad, making the process efficient and easy. I had an absolute blast with the Heretic Legion, refining some of my established techniques, trying new things, combining different types of media and effects, and just throwing everything I could at them to bring them to life in the most brutal, horrific and heretical way possible. To watch the series in full, head on over to the Grimdark Compendium, where you still have some time to catch a great deal in our Trench Crusade sale. I'm absolutely stoked to see what the other guys come up with their specific factions. While you're there, don't forget to check out our new Valentine's Day sale, where you can pick up the stellar Crimson Grove course by Zatcaskagoon Miniatures, Villainy Ink Starter Set, an Extra Goon's Grime and STL, all together as a bestial bundle. I hope you enjoy watching the Heretic Legion series as much as I did creating it. I bid you a good week, keep it grim, and I'll see you next time.